All right, well, good morning. So my name is Eric Sorensen. I'm popular on Twitter. If you're on the IRC channel, I'm Eric Zero on IRC. Eric was taken on Keynote by 2004, so I had to put zero at the end of it. That's also my email address at Puppet Labs if you feel like sending me an email. I'm the product manager for Puppet, for our platform projects. I've been working there for almost 3 years now, and was a Puppet user for about 3 years before that, and systems administrator and configuration management. My first config management deployment used CF Engine version 1.5 back in 1998, so I've been doing this for a long time, and I'm really excited to help shape where Puppet is going and where the state of configuration management in general is going in automation in our industry. I'd like to ask everyone to take out your phones for a moment, and if you have a Twitter account, so tweet out Samantha, and thank them for being a sponsor for this event. That lets them know that their money in the sponsorship was well spent, and helps them get some encouragement to continue to do this. The hashtags for the conference itself are Scale13X, and we're also following Puppet Camp hashtags. And if you have questions, or if you just want to have a back channel, if there's something that one of the speakers said that you needed a link for, something like that, just use that hashtag on Twitter, and we'll be able to track it down. It's also kind of fun because after the event, we'll do a wrap up, and if you have a particularly amusing tweet or a good picture of something that happened, we'll include that in the blog post at the end of the event. Also, the reason I'm asking you to take out your phone, and this will hopefully be the only time that you do that, is just to make sure that it is muted, because as a speaker and for the rest of the day, it's incredibly obnoxious to have people's calendars going off, your message alerts and so forth. And you're not at work anyways, so why do you need your calendar reminders? There's no need to turn them off. Wanted to mention too, Samantha is hiring pretty aggressively. They have some hiring sheets out on the back, and Oscar and Ramya here up front are happy to talk to anybody if you're looking for DevOps related positions here in Southern California. They're super excited to talk to you. In the grand tradition of Puppet Camps, I like to start off with some polls, and I'm not going to do too many of these because you get tired of raising your hand. Like, why don't you do the work? I'm not here to get exercise. I'm here to learn about Puppet. But can you raise your hand if you're using Puppet right now in your job? Not right this very minute, but in your job in general. Cool. How about if you're using some other non-Puppet automation tool, or a tool in conjunction with Puppet? Was about 10% or so. Who's using automation that you primarily wrote yourself, or you wrote in-house in the team? I'm sorry, it gets better. Who's not using any automation whatsoever? Do you feel like most of your systems work is primarily manual processes, and you do a lot of logging into systems and making changes? Wow, five or six people, cool. I promise you too, life gets better. There's a better way, and hopefully that's what we're here to talk about today. I'm going to try to set the stage a little bit for the rest of the day's talks, and do a little bit of an overview of where the industry is at, where IT is at overall, and where Puppet fits into that in our world. First message, I guess, is that there's a lot going on in automation and in technology today. Luke Kiniz of wrote Puppet as our CEO, got into kind of a back and forth with Mitchell Hashimoto, who wrote Vagrant and some of the other tools that HashiCorp has been putting out. Luke's assertion was that you can't envision any future in which there are fewer systems to manage than we have today. In every possible scenario, there are more machines. The complexity of systems that we're having to manage is going up day by day, and at no point is that going to be simple. Mitchell's counter post was that that may be true in aggregate, but for a lot of people, they're managing fewer systems in-house, and the systems that they're managing are actually just core to their business, And to a large extent, many of that complexity is externalized through APIs and through software and service kind of providers. Counter-repose says that your SaaS is somebody else's systems. That's it. Even if you yourself have externalized it, that complexity lives somewhere. It lives in somebody's data center, and they're having to manage those systems on your behalf. So the industry overall is getting more complicated. I guess all of this is just to say there is a lot going on, and that the life of a sysadmin or an operations engineer or a DevOps DevOps person is not getting it's not getting any easier. It's hard enough. In the historical sense, this is kind of the classical image of a troll living under a bridge. Nobody knows what you're doing in your job until you screw it up, and no one ever says, "Hey, thanks a lot for all those servers you provisioned yesterday. That was a really great job, well done." It's kind of like the failure. When there's a failure mode, then that's when the system springs into action. And there's always a tension between having to complete and work on longer-term projects that help the state of your infrastructure overall, and dealing with the fires that are cropping up from the existing infrastructure that you're trying to run every day. There was a study that came out that said that it was about the life of a systems administrator, life of IT folks, and on average, administrators were interrupted about every 15 minutes during the workday. And concurrent with that, there was another more broad study around office work in general that said that if you're doing knowledge work that requires focus, concentration, that after an interruption, it takes about 30 minutes for you to return to the state you were when you left off. You're interrupted for 15 minutes, and it takes 30 minutes to get back to concentration, then there's nearly no point in the day that you can actually concentrate on the projects that you're trying to get done. And so, sometimes you have to make up for it by working late, working on the weekends, getting in at 5:30 in the morning when there's nobody else there, so you need some quiet time in the office. And just continually under pressure to do more, do it faster, do it for less money, do it with fewer errors. In parallel with that, the IT systems are getting more critical than ever. It's not that your infrastructure is a cost center anymore. Companies have recognized that the way that their infrastructure runs is actually a competitive advantage. And if it's not your competitive advantage, your competitor has an advantage and it's your disadvantage. So the slow turnaround on provisioning systems, slow turnaround on making change, on pushing new change out, on testing and delivering change is actually, if you're not moving up, you're actually falling behind, and that can be a really tough situation. I think a lot of big companies in the late 90s and early 2000s had made an erroneous conclusion after looking at how much the servers cost and how much the people to run them cost, people in this room, that they might be better off outsourcing a lot of those services and externalizing them to a vendor, maybe offshoring them, or just bringing in a vendor to run things for them. And I think a lot of companies in recent years have realized that may have been a terrible mistake. And a lot of the communication difficulties, the coordination amongst these external entities, the lack of responsibility and ownership around the system actually made things worse. And so the trend now, the pendulum is swinging back in the other direction, and we're bringing services back in-house. But you can't just do the same thing you were doing before. It's not just about the raw technology, it's about speed, focus, agility, alignment, and this is true. These are general sort of business principles overall, but they're particularly relevant in today's IT world. You need to have fast time to market. You need to be able to be agile, whether that's with a capital A in terms of the practices of agile development that are being instilled into operations folks in the DevOps team, and just course correct if things are wrong rather than build up a systems architecture, take 6 months to prove it out, and then deliver it, and then realize, oh wow, that was the wrong thing. You can't do that anymore. You have to be a lot more shipped in smaller increments so that we can course correct if things are wrong. Focus, this is a border collie, which is one of those insane dogs that will just focus on doing an agility course, but will herd sheep all day long if you let him. Jim Collins gives a great book. It's a pretty awesome book. I think some of the core case studies that he included in that book have kind of fallen out of favor of been proven to have been overtaken. For instance, he talked about what an awesome retail software company, or retail electronics giant Circuit City was. And if you look around and try to go to the Circuit City store, they're all gone. But some of the principles hold still. One of the core ideas that we had was around being a hedgehog and having one thing that you do that's really great, focusing on that one core competence. And the last part of it is about alignment, making sure that we as a business and as an IT organization are trying to solve the actual problems that our customers, whether they are, whether we're running one of those SaaSes that has external customers and need to know what it is that they care about, or whether it's an internal organization and our customers are the other employees that work at the organization and need to deliver services to them. We have to make sure that what we're doing is actually aligned with what their problems are. A lot of these trends and these sort of ideas have come together in this state of DevOps report, which was done the last 2 years running, and I believe this week we'll have the latest edition of it out. Has anybody read this or gone through it? State of the DevOps report? A couple of folks. It's pretty interesting. It was a pretty amazing breadth of data that we collected. There was about 9,000 recipients from all kinds of different IT organizations, and some very interesting conclusions that came out of it. This report is helpful in a few different ways. On the one hand, it's interesting reading and can kind of help you if you're trying to figure out if your company in particular is in a transition in between a more silo type of organization where traditionally the operations folks run the systems and the application developers will throw things over the wall to them, and you're tasked with running whatever was handed to you, and you're trying to move to a more collaborative way. The collaborative way of operating. The DevOps report will talk about what specific changes that organizations that successfully made that transformation have done in order to deliver value more quickly, with lower cost, all those things from the last slide. The other useful thing about this report is that if you are in a position where you want to promote this idea of more collaborative working, in the John Willis talks about DevOps, he always goes back to these 4 principles of culture, automation, monitoring, and sharing. And if you're having difficulty convincing other people in your organization, this report has tons of great graphs and pretty pictures and other things that upper management tends to love, and can be very effective in convincing them that not only is this a good thing to do, but it will make their employees, i.e. happier, but it actually improves the bottom line for the business. So check that out. Look for the new edition that's going to come out this week. It'll be posted up on our blog. A couple of more quick trend lines for the industry overall. It's 2015, so we have to talk a little bit about cloud. But the term has become so overloaded that it's kind of meaningless now, or it can be meaningless. I saw an ad on TV last week for your home cloud. And I was like, home cloud, what is that? I had to go and click through and look at, it didn't make any sense to me. It turns out it's a hard drive with a Wi-Fi adapter. So that's a cloud. AWS is a cloud, and people are now doing internal clouds as well. And it's really this last one. I'm going to discount that first category. It may come to be a super important disruptive trend in the industry, but somehow I don't think so. But certainly, services like Amazon Web Services are definitely changing things, and they're allowing enabling customers to move faster, to burst their workloads, to run more quickly. And then internal private cloud is another big part of that, where if you as an organization want to allow either your QA team or your developers, or even just for your own servers to self-provision, do self-service, to spin up a new instance without having to wait, again, weeks or in some cases months for a server to be delivered. A lot of people are running either VMware-based stacks or an internal OpenStack instance, and these are fundamentally changing the way that people are doing business. Marco's going to talk after lunch about using Puppet in conjunction with AWS. So if this is either something that you're doing now or is something that you're interested in, we'll have more content on that later today. Again, it's 2015, so I can't give a speech without talking about Docker. In some cases, we was at configuration management camp in Belgium a couple of weeks ago, and one of the tracks was summed up as a sort of Brady Bunch kind of cry, just Docker, 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 Docker. There's a lot of interest and a lot of movement around containers and immutable infrastructure in general, so not just Docker itself as a company and as a platform, but this idea of we're not going to make changes to a running system. We're going to deploy a system, and how it goes out the door is how it runs until it's terminated. Netflix kind of started this trend. Adrian Cockcroft, I think he's gone back on this, but he called it originally a no-ops. So it wasn't DevOps, it's not operations, it's no-ops. Oddly enough, Netflix is still hiring ops people, so I'm not sure exactly how that came about. I think they actually kind of recanted that, and they realized that what they're doing is just sort of a different kind of ops. It's about building an image, deploying changes to that image, freezing it, and then deploying a bunch of those, whether as they're containers, as lightweight sort of virtual machines, or as full-fledged individual instances like individual Amazon AMI. But this again is one of those concepts that is new. It's new in execution, I should say. It's not new in implementation. It's also been said that there have been no new technological trends in IT that were not originally delivered on the IBM systems in the 60s. And containers and lightweight virtualization were part of that platform. And just kind of the tooling was difficult, and certainly they didn't have a great logo, which I think is kind of a death knell for them. But this is definitely changing the way people are doing business, and we're still trying to figure out exactly what that's going to mean for people that don't fit the particular sort of leading edge profile that our Docker team can offer today. The last kind of trend I want to talk about is sort of an offshoot of all of that stuff, which is a thing called shadow IT. So this sort of happens when the demands of the organization are not being met by the operations. The operations. So typically what happens is the developers will need a place to deploy and test images. The turnaround time, like you're back in that weeks to months sort of turnaround time to get a new system provisioned and delivered. And they look around and say, hey, all I need is a credit card and AWS. I can spin up my own machines. I don't need to wait for this. They've now gone around the traditional IT organization, and while it may work for them and it may be very convenient, the downside may come in the form of like a $65,000 AWS bill that shows up at the end of the month. It's like, holy crap, this is not what they said. It was a free tier. How did they get charged $65,000? What happened? So this is kind of what I would call a maladaptive response to an IT organization that's not able to respond to the demands of the business. Which leads us to talk about Puppet a little bit. So in short, so some of this will be if you're using Puppet now, or if you've been using it for a while, some of this may be introductory, but I've talked to at least a few people already this morning who are new to the ecosystem. They might be new to configuration in general. So I just want to give a brief overview of Puppet's sort of technology, its ecosystem, and some of the benefits to you if you've been adopted in your organization. The main goal is that we want to automate repetitive procedures and automate those manual tasks so that you can focus on things that matter to the business. Get rid of those fires, those interruptions, so you can focus on your long-term projects and enhance the function of your organization overall and help your business out. We want to allow you to make rapid, repeatable change and enforce the consistency of your system. So we want to have not just traditional servers, but also virtual machines and cloud services, as well as new kinds of devices like network switches, routers, and storage, which I'll talk about in just a minute. And the benefits to you is we just want to provide you with, again, back to that focus and agility. We want to help you increase your speed, increase your productivity, and importantly, provide insight, again, back to that culture, automation, monitoring, sharing. We want to allow you to understand what's going on in your system and make it so it's not just a big black box, and you need to go consult the guru on the mountain to figure out how to make a change to this. It should be easy even for everyone to both make a change to the systems and then test it, have a good degree of assurance that what they're doing is the right thing, and find out what the result of that change was. And how do we do that? It's just through managing a bunch of sort of system primitives, and these are all things that are in your infrastructure that you might have some automation, or you might have some need for automation to manage them. Everything from users and groups all the way up to jobs, package repositories, and be able to build a model of not just what a system looks like, but what the application looks like overall. And as I mentioned, network and storage is blown up here. We have a really awesome collaborative endeavor with some of the network vendors like Hiera Networks, Cumulus, Hiera, Cumulus, Juniper, Cisco, to define a common set of network-based primitives, like just like you would manage firewall rules on a system, you should be able to manage ACL rules on a router or switch, and just like you manage DNS services or STP services on a system, you should be able to manage VLANs, routing tables, and trunk interfaces on a switch in a platform-independent sort of way. So just like on a Unix system, if you use Puppet, you don't have to remember what the flags to add user are, or whether it's add user or user add. You shouldn't have to remember the syntax that differs in between a Unix switch and a Cisco switch. And as I mentioned, the cycle is really around define what you want your systems to look like. Test the changes, make sure that the things that are going to change are what you expect and that there's not unexpected side effects. Enforce the desired state, so rather than just running through a script, we're actually going to build a model of what the state ought to look like, and then compare what's going on in the system to what that model says the system ought to look like. Instead of remediating anything that's not in line, and then send back a report so that you can understand what happened. We got a little bit into the code here. This is a very classic kind of setup for public code, and in many cases, you will, if you're just starting out, not have to write very much of this because of the great content library that we have on the public code. It's about 3,000 modules, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. And Jeremy's going to talk about how to build a great module right after this talk. But in general, if you do dive under the hood, this is what public code looks like. It's a fully featured programming language, but the goal was to lower the barriers and make it really simple to read, simple to parse, simple to understand for humans. So you don't have to necessarily be a programmer in order to get successful with it, in order to make use of it. As you can see, it was sort of like it looks more like a configuration file than it does like a programming language. And again, this goes back to this idea of defining what our desired state is rather than procedurally going through and executing something scripts. We've described a package, the OpenSSH server, a file that's the configuration file, and a service that needs to be running in order to enable SSH. I'm sorry if the bottom of this is cut off for those in the back. It would be very difficult for me to raise up the screen. I wish I could do that. So in the syntax, again, looks pretty simple. One of the things that I wanted to point out about this script is that not only is there the description of what the attributes of each of these kinds of objects are, what these resources are on the system, but there's some linkage between them. So for instance, and I'll just point at this one because I'm pretty sure everybody can see this one on the top. We've asserted that the package for us is that the OpenSSH server needs to be installed before the config file is is managed. And we're going to use the config file and replace whatever came out of the box with this version that comes from the file server. And that way we make sure that the directories are created, the package is already there, and we're overriding the config that came out of the package with the one that's customized for our site. Finally, down at the bottom, and again, I'm sorry, I apologize in the back. So there are 2 lines down at the bottom here. One of them says subscribe to the file, the SSH config file, and require the package, the OpenSSH server that's up at the top here. And these are in Puppet's terminology called meta parameters, and they're sort of like parameters that are outside of it. They're not inherent to any particular kind of resource, but are applicable to a bunch of them. And they describe what ought to happen when one of these things changes. So in this case, the subscribe means that if this file changes, we're going to restart the service. And normally that's something that you would have to script. You'd have to do some conditional logic and say, hey, if this differed, go through and restart the service. Puppet takes care of that logic for you, just with the simple line that says subscribe to it. And the require line is sort of like it's kind of like an after, the opposite of before, it's an after. So make sure the package is installed first, and if there are ever any changes to this file, then restart the SSH service. And that way we get a really nice abstraction layer over what the system needs to be doing, and we can just ensure that things are the way they're supposed to be and build a graph of what those dependencies look like. The syntax is pretty simple, and the goal there, as I said, is to make it so that it's easy for people who are not super experts in it to at least understand where it is they would need to make a change. As people get into wider teams and more people working on the same code base, there are other processes like code review process and some of those other sort of DevOps practices around continuous integration on your infrastructure code as well as your application code that'll really help out with this. But at a base level, people should be able to log in. People should be able to make changes to this code without a great amount of fear that what they're going to do is to destroy all their systems. It's also nice to have the syntax because it can be really helpful to provide your Puppet code to people who aren't in your organization, just to describe what the system's going to do. I had a situation where I had to work with some auditors who were ensuring our PCI compliance, and to be fair, these were very savvy auditors. I worked with a lot of auditors that were not quite that savvy, but they we just provided them with our Puppet code, scripted the passwords and sort of the sensitive data, and they just took an archive of that and read through it. Once we could assert that the systems were being configured this way, and we could prove that the code was being applied on the systems, that gave the auditors assurance that the systems were configured in the way that the Puppet said that they should be. And they said, that's pretty awesome. It's the fastest audit that they've ever been through, and they wish that other organizations were able to provide that level of assurance for them. Any questions on this? And yeah, feel free to jump in. Yeah.
I'm just wondering. So up in the package, you say before file, or you say before you load the SSHD config. In the next part where you actually where you're defining the service, you do say require.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, is there any type of dependency? Like, is that creating a dependency graph, and how does that get resolved?
So the question is this building a dependency graph? And the answer is, it's not building a dependency cycle. It ends up making a graph, yes, a directed acyclic graph that starts out with the thing that has no dependencies inbound to it, and sort of works its way backwards from that. But yeah, so in this case, the package comes first, and then both the file and the service are after that. Do this dependencies. Yep. And here's another example. This one is interesting because it shows that we can model all kinds of things in that same kind of way, in that same part of syntax. Windows admins can play too. This is a series of resources which are all available with the recently released Windows module pack, which allows you to manage a bunch of different kinds of systems. If you're looking on the code for it, it's just called Windows. And it provides things like a way to manage IIS, these individual Windows features, which is an internal representation of what those features look like on the Windows system, and packages can be managed in the same way using the Windows package format, although in this case we have to provide a source for it, where it should download, because unless you use something like Chocolate, which we have support for, Windows doesn't have the content of a repository that you can download from. And then the reboot on the reboot resource on the bottom is a way to say that after this .NET package has been installed, that we're going to need to reboot and display it on the system and actually trigger the scheduled reboot of it. It's pretty awesome, and there's a huge amount of Windows-specific content that's available now. This is a big change from a couple of years ago, and it's really been amazing to see the uptake and the growth, not just amongst Windows system administrators, but amongst teams that have a mix of some Windows and some other operating system. Because now, instead of having a totally separate, kind of siloed off set of tools and configuration and utilities that the Windows team uses and nobody else has insight into, everybody can use a common tool chain, write their descriptions of what their systems all look like in Puppet, and work together a lot more effectively. I mentioned the Puppet forge earlier, and there's tons of modules out there. I think there's about 3,000 modules. The website is just forge.puppet.com. And they manage all kinds of different types of servers, Windows, Linux, Unix servers. There's some native resources that will help out if you're on more esoteric Unixes like AIFs. I believe we have an engaged UX system on there, but there's a fair amount of AIF work that's been going on. Let me talk for just a minute about that loop I mentioned. Define your state, test it, enforce, and then get a report. And the way that happens under the hood is that each of the systems, when they check in, upload a set of facts that are little bits of information about the system. And this is these are gathered by a tool that's called Factor. And Factor knows a lot about a lot of different operating systems. And we'll send in a list of somewhere between 50 and 200 individual facts back on each time that it checks in with the Puppet server. And these are things like, what kernel version am I running? How much memory do I have? It's very easy to extend Factor to make custom facts that are just applicable to your own environment. That'll say things like, which application cluster is this in? Which data center is this in? And that way, Puppet has all of that information at its disposal when it makes a catalog. It'll go through, find all the modules that are supposed to be applied for that node, and build a catalog out of them, which it sends down to the end system. This is the end result of that graph building exercise that I mentioned earlier. And the system then does the enforcement on itself locally, and then sends in a report back to the server at the end. Those reports, I'm blasting through this, and I apologize if this is going very quickly. If you have more questions about specific things, feel free to grab me after the talk or one of those breaks, and we'll get into more detail. Those reports, along with the facts and a copy of the catalogs that are sent out today, are all stored in PuppetDB, and you can do a lot of data warehousing, data mining kinds of operations against PuppetDB. You can use it use information that's in real time, so that you can propagate information about one system to the other systems that need to know about it. And it's sort of the heart of the historical reporting and archival information about your Puppet infrastructure. We have a tool called MCollective as well that lets you do parallel real-time execution across your whole network. MCollective runs as a separate process. It will talk to PuppetDB in order to get a list of posts that you want to execute a command on. And there's a very sophisticated filtering syntax that says, like, only run on the systems that are in this data center that are running Route 7. And it'll execute commands on the systems in parallel in very fast, efficient way. You can do stuff like run a report of all of the existing SSH versions. One of the talks at Public Campaigns a couple of days ago, the speaker gave an example of having to remediate the problems with the shell shock vulnerability that came out a couple of months ago, and was able to do it with MCollective with a few quick commands and provide reports back to his management to show that all of the systems in the data center had been patched except for these two, which weren't running MCollective and couldn't get onto. And that was pretty awesome, and it made his life a lot easier. All of that stuff runs in has a heavy server component, and the server side stuff is moving more towards a JVM-based solution. PubDB runs on the JVM as well. It's written not in Java directly; it's written in a functional programming language called Clojure. And most of the server-side components that we're working on these days are also working in Clojure. It's a really nice way to leverage the power of JVM and all the tuning that's gone on to it over the last 20 years in order to make really reliable, scalable network services to manage the nodes checking in. This was a new service that we released last year. It hit 1.0 towards the end of the year. We shipped it up in Enterprise 3.7, and it is also an open source project. So if you're interested in starting out in looking at a functional programming language, or you're interested in Clojure specifically, this public server project is open source and might be a cool way to get started because it's directly influencing running that infrastructure. I'm going to talk about just a couple of more pieces of our ecosystem, and these are kind of advanced capabilities that that we provide that are sort of outside the core of what Puppet itself does, is that sort of enforce report loop that I mentioned, but are also essential for running your infrastructure. Excuse me. One of them is Razor. Is anybody here using Razor? You heard of it? It's one of those things that the public camp talks on it are generally packed to the gills. There's a lot of interest in this problem of provisioning, how you bring new machines and new VMs into your infrastructure. And Razor is sort of our solution for that. It's a rules-based provisioning for bare metal hardware as well as virtual servers, and it feeds those machines directly to your public infrastructure. So there's not this kind of handoff of hey, we provision these machines, now what? Because it's part of Puppet's ecosystem, they get fed directly into your Puppet ecosystem, infrastructure, sorry. The next two tools are pretty closely related. Hiera is a way to extract out the pieces of your configuration that are pure data. So for instance, the version of Apache that you want to be running on your RHEL 6, which is RHEL 7 system, would necessarily differ because they ship with different versions of Apache. Rather than have to put an if-else kind of conditional inside of your Puppet manifest in order to handle that difference, our sort of best practice are to extract that stuff out and put it into Hiera so that your logic inside of your code, which has more possibilities for things going wrong, doesn't have to change when you add a new version. It doesn't have to change when you want to bump that. It's just purely, most people use a YAML backend, and just changing like one value to another inside of YAML is a lot easier than trying to add a new if-else conditional. And keeps your code simple and straightforward and lets you maintain those as a little bit on a separate release cadence. Also key to that is the concept of promoting code through your infrastructure. We talk a lot about infrastructure as code. I've mentioned it a couple of times already about treating the bits that run your Puppet infrastructure as in a manner as similar as possible to the way that you would an application that was rolling through continuous integration in a continuous deployment kind of environment. R10K is our tool that helps you do that. It helps you test out changes, and at its heart, what it does is it maps branches in your revision control system, preferably Git, but it'll work with other things as well, to environments on your public server, and allows you to take changes, and rather than having to copy them or manage them in a one-off kind of manner, actually use the tools of revision control, merging, branching, to manage how that code moves through your infrastructure. So we map, again, a code branch onto an environment certain nodes are pointed at different environments on the public server, and they'll get handed out different versions of the code and data as they check in. And that way you can do very deliberate, very staged, very manageable deployments of code starting out in the system. You know very much about a dev system or a laptop or whatever, a virtual machine, and then move it closer and closer out to production until it's actually running live. So all of these pieces that I've just talked about are available as open source projects. And as an open source project, you can pull them together, you can pick and choose those which are necessary for you to run your infrastructure, and build up a system that uses them for yourself. We're committed to releasing as much of these kind of foundational platform projects as possible as open source, and really driving innovation there. The model that we're trying to move to is kind of like a Red Hat / Fedora model, where there's a bunch of fast-moving stuff. If you like living on the bleeding edge and you're willing to file bugs, contribute back, and run that really sort of leading edge code on your systems, and presumably you have a great infrastructure that allows you to test changes in a controlled manner, so you're not pushing stuff live to production before you test it. That's really the open source Puppet world. And Puppet Enterprise is much more like a RHEL kind of situation, where we have long-term support. We also are building these commercial applications on top of that platform, so that there's still open source pieces on the bottom. We have things like a separate set of workflows for node management, configuration management, application management, and operations management, where you sort of understand get a little insight into what's going on in your infrastructure. And those things are built on top of the platform and provide value add for customers that need things like role-based access control. The team that's big enough that you want to delegate out, hey, these people are only allowed to do certain things, and these people are allowed to do to read only but not write anything. We figure that's kind of a commercial level capability, and those sorts of things are not going to be built into open source project. Node Manager is example one of the applications in the shift in Puppet Enterprise 3.7. This is a tool for managing which, when your node checks in, what modules get applied to it, what classes get applied to it, and it uses a rules-based architecture. So instead of having to map specifically like this node's name goes to these classes, you can say nodes which have similar characteristics that are, say, in this data center, that using facts from Factor, they have a disk array on them. They're probably going to be a database server, and I want to classify the modules that are necessary to run a database. That's kind of the paradigm for the node manager. In Operations Manager, we did a cool demo of this live at PublicConf last year. But this is a extension onto the public server that allows exporting a huge amount of insight into what's happening on the Puppet master itself out to Graphite and then graphing that in Grafana. So on this chart, this is sort of a screenshot of what that Grafana dashboard looks like, and this shows like what are the slowest calls that are coming into the Puppet master. Are they catalog requests, or they file serving, and if there's a sudden spike in there, we can say, hey, somebody just pushed a change, and that caused a huge spike in catalog compilation time. That's probably not a great thing. Compilation time overall, and then function calls, so you can see what the most common calls are that are used to compile catalogs. So this is a pretty neat thing, and is part of that operations manager app that I talked about. And then the insight reporting is another app. And this is a screenshot also from Puppet Enterprise 3.7 that shows kind of the last 30 days of change across your infrastructure. If there were failed events, you could drill down into those and see exactly what happened. So that's kind of down to the product part of it. Again, I'm happy to answer questions about that. There's a lot of material there, there's a lot of stuff going on. It's tough to cover it all in a way that's going to be applicable to everybody, but hopefully that was helpful for you. But the question ultimately is why does it matter? Like what does this do for a company once it's implemented? And going back to that DevOps survey, the things that the researchers found was that those high-performing IT organizations, the ones that are actually providing competitive advantage to their business, end up deploying code more frequently. They end up pushing out changes because that speed and the agility if there's something that goes wrong. They have fewer failures, and this is kind of flies in the face of the traditional risk-averse kind of change management board where you have to gather up all your changes, print them out, bring them in front of people, get 10 or 12 people to sign off on the change, and everyone sort of pulls their brothers and happens. But it turns out that as you deploy smaller changes more frequently and roll forward in the case of a small failure, you actually end up with fewer failures overall. Automation catches a lot of things before they hit production, and the impact of any given change is much smaller rather than having to batch everything up for a month and do everything in one frantic 8-hour period. If we're continuously deploying new change out, that sort of makes a logical amount of sense. Each one of those changes is going to have a much more, a smaller and more measurable impact, and be able to fix things much more quickly if they go wrong. And the bottom line is that it contributes to higher growth for those organizations which are able to pull this off. So there's a strong business case to be made. This is the right thing to do. These are some public installations that have pretty interesting stories around this. The CERN in Switzerland moved from a ingrown system, it become ingrown system, I meant to say, that was called Quator, that in 2003, the state of the infrastructure tooling in the world was not sufficient to deal with their HPC environment at CERN. So they built this complicated tool in-house and ran it for several years. But in 2011, they re-examined what it was that they were getting from that tool. The original people who wrote it moved on, and it seemed like the world had changed out from under them. So they reevaluated their whole infrastructure layout and replaced the Quator. They embarked on a multi-year effort to replace Quator with a stack that's based on open source tools, which has Puppet at its core, but also uses things like Foreman and OpenStack to build out to manage their infrastructure. So this was a really interesting case study. Tim Bell talked about it at Puppet Camp in 2012 and introduced that sort of the metaphor that is now like an obligatory DevOps drinking game, two-shot drink of talking about your machines as if they were cattle, not pets. To move from a situation where each of the pets, each of your systems has a name, you care about it a lot, when you get sick, you nurse it back to health. They all have their own personalities, and we want to make sure that they're happy. To a system where we have a bunch of machines that have something much more like a serial number stamped on their ear than a name like Lucky. And when they get sick, they're probably not going to spend a whole bunch of time worrying about whether they're feeling good or whether their tummy hurts. They're probably just going to get a cow. That sort of mind shift is what CERN had to go through, and generally speaking, what we think our industry is going through. So that leads to things like rules-based classification that I showed in the node manager, and the idea that we're really trying to broaden and generalize and be less concerned about the individual identity of our machines and more about what they do for the business. So what's next? Regardless of where you are, the one thing that I feel is certain is that we are just at the beginning of innovation. Things are just sort of getting started. If you look at like the software industry, it's been around for a lot longer than big data management has, and we're still cutting out software. We just need to keep learning, stay interested, and stay flexible. So this was a survey from DICE for what skills were most in demand by hiring folks. And Puppet, we beat out cybersecurity, which is good, because I think that kind of ended in 1998. At least prefixing things with cyber. Well, we also beat out big data and NoSQL, so there's some other buzzwords that Puppet and IT automation in general is pretty much a demand. And you can help yourself out by attending events like this. You have a great online learning program that you can go through and complete these quests that each have a pretty defined scope. Like we're going to go through and get to the point where we're managing the user, we're installing a new application all through Puppet, and the app keeps track of your progress and done a pretty good job of, I guess, gamifying Puppet, although you don't get any points for it, so I'm sorry for that. One step sort of beyond that is in-person training and certification, and we're constantly tuning the classes that are available. This is sort of the current class offering. We also have some distance learning stuff, so there's now a specific Windows class. So if you're a Windows administrator wanting to get started with Puppet, there's a sort of different, we realize that there's sort of a different tool set that you need to use, and it doesn't make sense to force your people to install a Linux VM just so they can get started with Puppet. So there's a separate Windows class now, as well as one that talks about how to get started with version control and Git in general, since that's such a fundamental thing.
Should you start off with fundamentals before you take the Windows class?
Good question. Should you start off with fundamentals before you take the Windows class? If you're primarily a Windows administrator, you should take the Windows class first, just because it's a distance learning thing. You can do it on your own, not on your own schedule. You have to be with the instructor. But it's kind of a less, I think it's a 9-hour class overall, and fundamentals is 3 full days, so it's a little more time for them. And if you go into fundamentals, having gone through the Windows class, you're doing a great addition. Good question. And all this stuff is available at publab.com. We just reskinned and reorganized the documentation site, so this is a pretty cool thing. Our docs are pretty amazing, honestly, and our doc team works really hard. The docs, I should also comment, are a great way to get started as a contributor, because you almost always have to read something. There's a ton of information there. If you are looking for something in particular and it's hard to find, or the information is not in line with what you found to be true, send the docs team a pull request, and they will review it and merge it into Hopefully. They love having those kinds of corrections. And that's a great way to sort of get your name in the credits, as well as get used to the contribution workflow that we have for all of the open source projects. We have a cool thing that's called the Test Pilot program. Is anybody here on Test Pilots? Oh, right. You folks, that's great. Yeah, so Test Pilots is a cool program that lets you get started, or lets you help us help everybody. We'll sign up. You sign up and answer a few questions when you sign up about what kinds of environment, what the characteristics are of your environment, what you're doing, and when there's a research project that comes out, we need to engage with people and figure out what the right solution should be in the product. We'll either do screen sharing sessions, or just a phone interview, or video chat or something like that, and work out how your particular problems can directly influence what the product does. And it can be a pretty cool experience. For our community stuff, there's a bunch of ways to get involved, and I'm not going to run through all of these because my time is running short. But the thing I wanted to comment on here was that for me, our community is quite precious to me. It was how I got involved with Puppet originally. And one thing I love about it is how inclusive and welcoming it is to new folks and to people who just trying to get started. And I think everybody's been there, that there's something that you're trying to get and it just isn't working for you. And one of the things that I love about our community is that we're really open to helping those people out, helping them get through the first couple of roadblocks and on your way. Because there's nothing worse than banging your head against something for an hour when you can just hop on IRC and ask a question and get an answer really quickly. Here's my obligatory hiring slides. As I mentioned it earlier, Puppet Lab's always hiring. Is anyone here not hiring in your group? That's a good sign overall, I think, for the health of the industry, but it's a little spooky. So we're definitely hiring, and this list is almost certainly out of date, because it was printed out last week. PublicConf 2015 is coming up, October 5th through the 9th, and it's in Portland this year. So if you're into any of the things that Portland is famous for, such as fancy donuts, craft beer, bicycling, tattoos. I've been forgetting what the stereotypes are, because I lived there for 3 years, and the Portlandia show was kind of like a documentary. But come on up, October 5th through 9th. It's going to be a great event. I mentioned earlier that our community is really inclusive, and I love that. I didn't want to leave with a comment that, and a challenge, I think, for all of us to continue to work to improve the inclusivity of it. Not just of Puppet itself, although we obviously have work to do, but of the tech industry in general. This slide is from my friend CJ's talk at Cascadia JS last year called No More Unicorns. The whole talk is really great, and I invite you to watch it. But this slide really stopped me in my tracks. It's really about what it is that you do out in the world that reflects what your values are. It's not what you say on your website or what you profess to when HR makes you, but it's actually what you do out in the world. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us to try to make it so that our industry allows access to things like higher education, to a community of people that's welcoming, and ultimately to the high-paying jobs that are the future of this, the future of the world here in the tech industry. So when you look at the automation space in general, there's a lot of runway in front of us. We're at the beginning of a really long and exciting journey. There's going to be a ton of things that, we couldn't have predicted Docker 3 years ago. We couldn't have predicted that this LXC thing that had been floating around on the Linux kernel for half a decade would suddenly rise up and take over the world. But there's a lot of change left to come. But the cool thing is that it's a very exciting time to be in the industry. It's exciting to be part of something that feels bigger than any individual one of us. And we're really happy to be on the leading edge of that. We're happy to help bring everybody along with us, and hope for a glorious future as we blast off into outer space. Thanks for your time, and thanks for joining us today.